hospital's cold fluorescent lights buzz overhead. Nurse Ava Moreno is barely holding it together. Ava's shoes were soaked. Again. The ER floor wasn't just stained with pain and panic. It was painted in exhaustion. Her shift had started 16 hours ago. She hadn't eaten in 10. And her last sip of water was a cold memory. The hospital's automatic doors burst open. Another emergency. Another noise. Another reason not to rest. But Ava didn't complain. She hadn't in years. Because for her, this job wasn't just a paycheck. It was purpose. Ever since her father died in this very hospital, she'd promised herself she'd never let another person feel alone on a stretcher. Still, being a hero doesn't pay rent in Brooklyn. When the end of her shift finally came, Ava collapsed into the nurse's lounge, massaging her temples, ready to cry from pure fatigue. "Long night?" a familiar voice asked. It was Nurse Edith, in her late 60s, kind-hearted, and always suspiciously alert. She handed Ava a paper cup filled with stale vending machine coffee. Ava took it like it was liquid gold. "I know that face," Edith added. "You're one rent bill away from a breakdown." Ava forced a smile. "That obvious, huh?" "More than obvious, which is why I might have something for you." Ava frowned. "Something?" "A job. Private, discreet. A favor, really. Pays $1,000. Ava raised her eyebrows. "What kind of job pays that much to a nurse off shift?" Edith sat down beside her, lowering her voice. "There's a man upstairs, room 804, private patient, terminal diagnosis, quiet type. He's not asking for treatment, he's asking for a companion." Ava blinked. "A what?" "Not like that." Edith chuckled. "He's been through hell, and now he wants someone to play a part. Says he's dying and doesn't want to face the next week alone. He wants a fiancé, just for 1 week." Ava stared at her, jaw slightly open. "A fake fiancé?" Edith shrugged. "He's paying in advance. He's already spoken to legal, all above board." "That's insane," Ava muttered. "Is it?" Edith tilted her head. "Or is it a tired man's way of saying goodbye with dignity?" An hour later, Ava stood outside room 804, heart pounding, debating whether to knock. She needed the money. Her landlord had already threatened eviction. But what kind of person signs up to play fiancé to a stranger? She knocked. A calm voice answered, "Come in." She stepped in. The room was dimly lit. A single reading lamp cast a warm glow on the man sitting in the corner. Tall, composed, wearing a charcoal cardigan over a crisp white shirt. He wasn't pale or frail. In fact, he looked powerful. His eyes met hers. Hazel. Cold at first, then curious. "You're the nurse," he said. "Ava," she replied. "I'm Julian," he said, standing slowly, revealing a quiet grace in his movements. "Thank you for coming." She hesitated. "So, this arrangement—" "I'll pay $1,000, Julian interrupted. 7 days. You don't have to pretend affection in public unless you're comfortable. Just act like we've been engaged for a few months. I have a few people to see this week." "Why not hire an actress?" she asked. "I don't want someone performing," he replied, folding his arms. "I want someone honest, who won't look at me like a ticking clock." Ava was silent. "I've already signed the NDA and the payment papers with legal. If you say yes, it begins tomorrow morning. If you say no, thank you for your time." There was something strange about him. Too calm. Too polished. A terminal patient should tremble, should fear. But Julian Carter simply looked bored. And underneath that boredom, Ava sensed something else, a secret. "I'll do it," she said quietly. Julian didn't smile. He just nodded. "Good. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. We'll start with brunch." That night, Ava lay awake in her cramped studio apartment, staring at the ceiling. What kind of man spends his last week faking love, and what kind of woman agrees to pretend? She sighed. Just 1 week. The sun filtered weakly through the city haze as Ava stood outside Benton's Cafe, a quiet little brunch spot tucked between a flower shop and a bookstore in Lower Manhattan. She checked her watch. 8:58 a.m. 2 minutes early. Her heart thudded against her chest, not from nerves, but from disbelief. She was about to meet a man she barely knew, a man who'd paid her $1,000 to pretend to love him for a week. What kind of story had she stepped into? A silver town car pulled up. The door opened smoothly, and Julian Carter stepped out, not with the frailty of a patient, but with the composure of someone who had been in control all his life. He wore a navy wool coat over a perfectly pressed button-down, scarf wrapped loosely around his neck. His presence belonged more to a boardroom than a hospital bed. "You're early," he said, checking his watch. "I like that." "I'm a nurse," Ava replied. "Time is never optional." Julian allowed a subtle smile as he opened the cafe door for her. Inside, the place smelled of roasted espresso beans and cinnamon. It was quiet, with jazz humming from a corner speaker and soft morning light casting long shadows across the polished floorboards. Julian had reserved a booth at the back, secluded but not hidden. The waitress greeted him like an old friend. "The usual, Mr. Carter?" "Yes. And whatever the lady would like." Ava raised an eyebrow. "You come here often?" "Only when I need quiet," he said, settling into the booth. "Or company I can trust." That made her pause. Was that a compliment? Or a warning? When the waitress left, Julian leaned forward slightly. "Before we begin, let's agree on a few things." Ava straightened. "All right. No forced affection, no scripted lines, just play the part naturally, as if we've been engaged for 6 months. We've lived separately for practical reasons, but we've spent most weekends together. You know me, I know you. Keep it simple. The story will hold." "And why exactly am I meeting your friends?" she asked. He hesitated for the first time. "There's a brunch today with 2 people I used to be very close to. They know I've been unwell. They've been distant since. I want them to see that I'm not dying alone." "But you are dying." Julian looked at her, and for a moment something flickered behind his eyes. Sadness, maybe, or a deeper truth. "I'm not ready to answer that yet." Ava didn't press. She looked down at her hands, then at the man across from her. He was calm, too calm, as if he had built a wall around himself so long ago that he didn't remember life without it. "You're very composed for someone with a terminal diagnosis," she said. He took a sip of water before replying. "I've made peace with most things. Not all, but most." Their food arrived, smoked salmon toast for him, a croissant sandwich for her. The meal looked elegant, but Ava barely touched it. Julian studied her. "You're nervous." "I'm pretending to be in love with someone I met 12 hours ago." "What gave it away?" He chuckled softly. "We'll work on it. Eye contact helps. So does remembering a few personal details." He slid a card across the table. "What's this?" "Your cheat sheet." She flipped it open. Inside were a few notes. "First kiss, Valentine's Day, clumsy, in the rain. Favorite movie, Casablanca. Our song, At Last, by Etta James. Inside joke, I always burn toast. Vacation dream, Tuscany." Ava blinked. "You planned all this?" "I believe in preparation." "You're not an actor, are you?" Julian's eyes glinted. "Not professionally." Their eyes met, and for a second, Ava forgot this was an act. He made her feel
scene. "Who are these people we're meeting?" she asked. "My old friends, Henry and Clarissa Roth. We met in business school. They knew me before. Everything changed. And they won't recognize me. Why would they? I mean, I'm not exactly, what? Rich, polished, like you." Julian leaned forward. "You're sharp, confident, and stunning. You'll be fine."
Ava blushed, caught off guard. "That's the first compliment I've gotten this year." Then the year just started getting interesting. He said it so casually she almost missed the warmth in his voice. At 9:40, Julian checked his watch and stood. "They're always early. We should head out." Ava followed him outside. The town car was still waiting. Inside the vehicle, silence fell. But it wasn't awkward. Ava stared out the window, watching the blur of the city move past. Then she spoke. "Julian, why me?" "What do you mean?" "Why not someone more glamorous, more experienced?" He looked at her with a seriousness that disarmed her. "Because I don't want someone who'll play the part too well. I want someone who'll make them believe I'm still capable of loving." That silenced her, because deep down she realized he wasn't just pretending, he needed to believe it too. They arrived at a high-rise rooftop restaurant in Soho. The sky was pale, the wind brisk, the view was dazzling, and at the corner table sipping mimosas were Henry and Clarissa. Clarissa rose first, elegant, cool, her blonde bob perfect. Henry followed, tall and distracted, holding his phone. Julian greeted them with poised charm. "Ava," he said, turning to her. "Meet Clarissa and Henry." Clarissa raised an eyebrow. "The fiancé?" Ava nodded, extending her hand. "Nice to meet you." Clarissa smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Likewise." They sat. The conversation started light, Julian catching up on mutual acquaintances, Clarissa bragging about her startup's latest media feature. Then came the first cut. "So, how did you two meet?" Clarissa asked, swirling her glass. Julian looked at Ava. "Tell them." Ava cleared her throat. "At the hospital, I spilled coffee on myself. He handed me a napkin. We started talking." "And you fell in love just like that?" Henry asked skeptically. "No," Ava replied calmly. "I resisted. He was persistent." Clarissa laughed. "He does that." Julian smiled faintly. "She's the first person who saw past everything." Clarissa raised an eyebrow. "Past what?" Julian said nothing. Ava gently touched his hand under the table. He flinched slightly but didn't pull away. Clarissa's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing more. When brunch ended, Julian paid the bill despite their protests. Ava stood awkwardly as they exchanged goodbyes. Clarissa leaned in to hug her. "He's different now, softer. I wonder why." Ava just smiled. Back in the car, Julian stared out the window. "That went well," Ava said. "Too well," he murmured. "What do you mean?" "They'll dig. They always dig." Ava watched him closely. "You've done this before, haven't you?" He paused. "No, I've never asked anyone to play this part before." "Then what are you really trying to prove?" Julian didn't answer. Instead, he turned to her and said, "There's someone else I want you to meet. My mother. Tomorrow." Ava's heart skipped. "This was only supposed to be brunch," she whispered. "Things change. Julian, I'm not an actress." "No," he said softly. "You're something far rarer." It was Sunday morning, just past 10, and the streets of the Upper East Side were unnaturally quiet. As the town car turned onto a tree-lined boulevard, Ava's fingers gripped her coat lapels tighter. Every breath she took fogged the tinted window beside her. Julian hadn't said much during the drive, only that they were going to see his mother. He said it like a formality, but Ava felt it wasn't. "You never told me her name," she said finally, breaking the silence. Julian kept his gaze on the passing brownstones. "Margaret. Margaret Carter." He nodded once. "Just Margaret. And she knows about me?" "She knows of you," he said quietly, "but she doesn't know you're rented." Ava turned slightly. "Is that how you see it? That I'm rented?" His eyes met hers, unreadable. "No, but I think that's how you see it." She didn't reply. The car slowed to a stop in front of a limestone townhouse, 4 stories tall, elegant, with ivy trailing up the columns. It looked like a piece of old New York that time had carefully avoided. The driver opened Ava's door. She stepped out, heart pounding. Julian extended his hand to her. "Ready?" She hesitated, then took it. Margaret Carter was not what Ava expected. She was seated in a sunlit parlor, wrapped in a silk robe the color of rose gold, her silver hair perfectly pinned. The room smelled of gardenia and old leather books. Her presence was regal, not intimidating, but precise. "Julian," she said, without rising, "you're late." "Traffic," he said, leaning down to kiss her cheek. Then he gestured. "Mother, this is Ava, my fiancé." Margaret studied Ava for a moment, eyes scanning from her shoes to her cheekbones, without a smile. "Charming," she said at last. Ava stepped forward, forcing herself to smile. "It's a pleasure, Mrs. Carter." "Margaret," she corrected, then gestured to a velvet loveseat. "Sit, both of you." They obeyed. Margaret poured tea with deliberate elegance, her every move practiced. "So, tell me, Ava, what hospital are you with?" Julian stiffened beside her. Ava blinked. "Lenox Hill, ER nurse." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "That's a demanding post." "I like it," Ava replied. "It keeps me human." That seemed to earn the faintest smile from the older woman. "Most people lose that in your field." "Most people never had it to begin with," Ava said softly. Julian glanced sideways as if surprised. Margaret sipped her tea. "So how does one fall in love with Julian?" Ava froze for a breath. Then she looked down at her cup and said, "He made silence feel like conversation." That caught even Julian off guard. Margaret's face didn't change, but something flickered behind her eyes. "Interesting," she said at last. "Most women fall for the portfolio." Ava met her gaze. "I didn't know there was a portfolio." Julian turned toward her slightly. She could feel his surprise. Margaret laughed lightly. Then perhaps he did something right for once. The rest of the visit passed in polite conversation, Margaret asking pointed questions, Ava giving graceful, simple answers. Julian said little. Occasionally Ava felt his hand graze hers, small touches grounding her, calming her. After an hour, Margaret stood. "I'm tired. Age is a persistent companion." Julian rose. "We'll leave you to rest." Margaret turned to Ava. "Walk with me to the door." Ava followed. At the threshold, Margaret paused. "He was different as a boy," she said suddenly. "Always distant. Always too clever for his own good. I feared the world would hurt him. Then I feared he'd stop letting it." Ava said nothing. Margaret's eyes settled on her. "Don't lie to him, even if he lies to you." Ava's chest tightened. "I haven't lied." "Not yet," Margaret said softly. "But you will, or you'll leave." And with that, she closed the door gently. Back in the car, Ava sat in silence, staring at her hands. Julian finally spoke. "She liked you." Ava glanced sideways. "That's not the impression I got." "She didn't insult you." "That's progress." A pause. "She said you were different once," Ava whispered. Julian looked straight ahead. "I was." "What changed?" He didn't answer. The car kept moving. They returned to Julian's apartment that afternoon. Ava had only seen it from the outside before. Now, as the elevator opened directly into the penthouse, she stepped into a world built in silence. Floor-to-ceiling windows, steel and marble, modern art that didn't try to impress, just be. It was spotless, unlived in. "Do you actually stay here?" she asked. Julian removed his coat. "Sometimes. No pictures, no personal clutter, no coffee mugs with names." He shrugged. "Things like that weigh a place down." Ava moved to the window. The city stretched below like a glittering map. "Why me, Julian?" He walked to the kitchen, poured 2 glasses of wine and handed her one. "I told you, I needed someone real. And you expect me to believe you picked a random nurse for that?" He sat on the couch, silent. She turned toward him. "I'm starting to think you weren't looking for company. You were testing people." Julian met her eyes. "Maybe I was testing myself." "Against what?" He gave her the smallest smile. "Hope." Ava sat beside him slowly, still holding the wine. "And your mother?" she asked. "What was that about?" Julian leaned back. "She's the last person who believed I could be good before I stopped trying." Silence fell. The city outside kept moving. But inside, something had slowed between them. A current neither of them dared step into fully. Yet. That night, Ava stood in the guest bedroom, one of 3, and looked out at the skyline. She couldn't sleep. In her hand was a note Julian had slipped under her door. "You held your ground today. Thank you for that. I don't need a performance. I need a mirror. Someone who sees me, even if I'm still learning to look." J. Ava read it twice, and for the first time since the agreement began, she wondered if she was in more danger than she realized. Not physical danger, but something far worse. Emotional danger. The following morning, the apartment was quiet. Ava awoke before dawn despite the blackout curtains. The bed was too comfortable, the room too pristine. Her body, accustomed to alarms, code blues, and cold hospital benches, didn't know how to rest in luxury. She wandered barefoot into the kitchen. On the marble counter, a handwritten note awaited her again. "Feel free to use anything in the kitchen. There's coffee, there's freedom. I'll be back by noon. J." Coffee was easy. Freedom was a myth. She poured herself a cup and stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows. From here, Manhattan looked peaceful, almost poetic. A city that had never made space for people like her. And yet, now she stood above it, like a guest in someone else's dream. Why does he live like a ghost in a glass box? Her thoughts were interrupted by the soft beep of the elevator. Ava turned, alert. Julian stepped in, dressed in a black wool coat, scarf loose around his neck, hair tousled from wind. No entourage, no briefcase, no mask this time. "You're early," she said, half teasing. "I couldn't sleep," he replied, eyes tired. "Isn't that my line?" He smiled faintly. "You think I sleep well living like this?" "You make it look easy." "It's not." He moved to the kitchen, poured himself a glass of water, and leaned against the counter. For the first time, Ava saw it clearly. He looked tired. Not the kind of tired that came from work, but the kind that came from carrying too much for too long. She walked over slowly. "You okay?" Julian didn't answer right away. He stared into his glass like it contained something heavier than water. Then he said quietly, "My father died in this apartment." Ava blinked. "Here?" He nodded. "Right where you're standing." She stepped back instinctively. He was already sick, but he never let anyone see it. Never let me see it. He refused hospitals, refused care, said weakness made you a target. Ava listened in silence. When he collapsed, I didn't call 911. I called our family lawyer. Why? Because I knew the moment he died, I'd inherit everything, and I didn't want it. Ava watched his face, pale and shadowed in the soft morning light. I've been rich since I was 18, he continued, and I've hated almost every minute of it. Then why not walk away? He looked at her. Because I don't know who I am without it. That landed like a stone in her chest. Julian finished his water and set the glass down with precision. You think I'm pretending to be someone else for fun, but the truth is, this, he gestured around. This is the performance. You and me, last night, tea with my mother. That's the closest I've come to being human in years. Ava swallowed. That's not fair. You're putting a lot on me. I'm not asking you to carry it, he said gently. I'm asking you not to run from it. Later that afternoon, they visited a small art gallery in Chelsea. Julian insisted it was a low-risk engagement, just quiet walls and minimal questions. Ava wandered through the minimalist rooms with him, pretending to admire abstract canvases. But her eyes kept drifting toward him instead. He wasn't performing anymore. He was watching, listening, living, and she didn't know what to do with that. Near the end of the exhibit, a middle-aged woman in a red coat approached them. Julian Carter? He stiffened. Yes. I'm sorry to bother you. I just wanted to say, I saw the article about your mother's foundation, what you did for the children's hospital. Thank you. That kind of generosity means more than you know. Julian nodded, humbled. Thank you. The woman turned to Ava. And you must be the fiancé. He's lucky. Ava opened her mouth to correct her, but something stopped her. Instead, she smiled and said softly, No, I'm the lucky one. Julian looked at her, and in that 1 second, neither of them were acting. That evening, Ava stood on the rooftop balcony of Julian's building, wrapped in one of his jackets. He joined her moments later, 2 mugs of tea in hand. Why tea again? She asked. Coffee gives me a false sense of energy, he said. Tea just tells me the truth. They stood in silence for a long time, watching the city flicker. Then Julian said, almost too quietly, You know I'm not dying, right? Ava turned sharply. What? He met her eyes. I said I wasn't ready to answer before. Now I am. Wait, are you saying you're not terminal? I have a condition. It's serious, but it's manageable. With the right care, I'll live. A long time, probably. Longer than my father did. Ava's stomach twisted. So why the whole final week story? He looked away. Because part of me was dying. The part that trusted people. The part that believed in connection. I needed to see if someone would stay without knowing what I had, without chasing my name or my money. I needed to believe someone could love me without a number attached. Ava took a step back, suddenly cold. So this was a test? No, he said, voice low. It was supposed to be a performance. But then you looked at me like I was a person. You challenged me. You cared. You ruined the script. She didn't speak. He stepped forward, hesitant. I know this was an agreement, but everything I've felt since, it wasn't fake. Ava's heart pounded in her chest. You should have told me, she whispered. I was afraid, he said, that you'd leave if you found out it was all a lie. She shook her head. It wasn't a lie, Julian. It was a manipulation. Julian stood still. I'll understand if you walk away now, he said. Ava turned to face the city. Then, after a pause, she whispered, I'm not walking away. Not yet. He let out a slow breath. But I'm not yours, she added, voice steady. Not until I know who you really are. Julian nodded slowly. Then let me show you. By Wednesday, the city had shifted. It wasn't the weather, though the sky hung low and gray like a held breath. It was something else. The unspoken tension between Julian and Ava was no longer contained in looks or pauses. It lived between every shared sentence, every step they took together. That afternoon, Julian emerged from a private call looking unsettled. I have a dinner tonight, he said, not meeting her eyes. With? People I used to trust. Ava tilted her head. Used to? They run a venture capital fund. Helped me launch JC Strategies when I was 23. And now? They've been circling. Like vultures? He gave a hollow laugh. Like friends with sharp knives. She crossed her arms. So why go? Because they requested to meet us. She blinked. You told them about me? Julian nodded slowly. They heard whispers. They want to see if you're real. Ava felt a ripple of discomfort. Am I being vetted? No, he said. Then quieter. You're being measured. I'm sorry. She exhaled. I agreed to pretend to be your fiancé, Julian, not your bulletproof vest. His jaw tightened. I know, but I also know how these people work. If you weren't there tonight, they'd read it as weakness. Ava looked out the window. So I'm a prop again. No, he said firmly. You're my truth in a room full of liars. That night, the restaurant was buried beneath a brownstone in Tribeca, candlelit, private. The kind of place where no one asked for names, only influence. Julian wore a crisp charcoal suit, his expression carved in stone. Ava matched him in a deep green satin dress that Margaret had sent over by coincidence the day before. As they descended the narrow staircase into the dim, opulent dining room, Ava whispered, Any last-minute advice? Yes, Julian replied. Don't let anyone make you feel small. They reached the table. 3 people waited. Adrian Lang, white hair, white teeth, thin as wire, voice like a news anchor. Mai Wu, young, ambitious, always watching, a venture genius with a lawyer's precision. Grayson Reed, soft-spoken, dangerous in silence. He owned boardrooms the way lions owned grasslands. Julian introduced Ava with his usual calm, and they greeted her with polished curiosity, the kind that evaluated her earrings and handshake in one glance. Adrian smiled like a wolf. So, this is the woman who convinced Julian Carter to show up to dinner again. Ava smiled back. I didn't convince him. I just reminded him food tastes better when someone else orders. Laughter. Genuine from May, controlled from Grayson, hollow from Adrian. They ordered drinks. Talk turned to markets, mergers, and scandals. Ava followed quietly, sipping her wine, letting their voices circle like sharks. Then came the strike. So, how did you two meet? Adrian asked, tilting his glass. Julian opened his mouth, but Ava beat him to it. He dropped his phone in the ER lobby. Adrian paused. The ER? I'm a nurse. Silence. A beat too long. Grayson leaned forward. And what was a Carter doing in an ER? Julian's eyes darkened. Visiting someone, he said. I was unwell. Was? May asked sharply. You're better? Improving. Grayson sipped his bourbon. Strange. The board at JC Strategies hasn't seen you in 6 months. Julian didn't blink. I needed time to reevaluate. To find yourself? Adrian mocked. In the arms of a nurse? Ava placed her glass down with delicate intent. Is there something wrong with being a nurse, Mr. Lang? He smiled tightly. Not at all. I just didn't realize Julian was suddenly in the market for authenticity. Julian's hand twitched beneath the table. Grayson chuckled. Let's not pretend this is about her. We're concerned about you. The man who built an empire going quiet for half a year, then suddenly showing up with a conscience. Julian leaned forward. I didn't go quiet. I just stopped answering to you. May raised an eyebrow. And now you answer to her? Ava spoke before Julian could. No, she said softly. He answers to himself for the first time in years. I'm just the one reminding him it's okay to be human. Grayson studied her like an analyst. She's not the actress we expected. She's not an actress at all, Julian said, locking eyes with him. Adrian leaned back, chuckling. You're slipping, Carter. Maybe, Julian replied, or maybe I've just stopped performing. When the dinner finally ended, Ava felt like she had run a mental marathon in high heels. Outside, under the cold streetlights, she turned to him. Why do you keep them close? Because they own pieces of my past, Julian replied, and sometimes the past tries to buy you back. Did they? He looked at her. They offered to buy out the company. Did you accept? He smiled faintly. No, but I did walk away from the board last year. Why? He hesitated. Because I signed off on a deal I didn't believe in. It made us millions, but it destroyed a family business, and I never forgave myself for it. Ava looked at him, startled. He'd never said anything that vulnerable before. I was becoming my father, he continued, and I knew if I didn't stop, I'd never come back. They stood in silence, the city murmuring around them. Then Julian said softly, You were never supposed to be part of this, but now you are, and it terrifies me. Why? Because I don't know how to protect you from the life I've lived. Ava stepped closer. Then don't protect me. Let me choose. His breath hitched. You still want to be here? I don't know what this is yet, she whispered. But I want to find out, as me, not as your fiancé, not as your lie. Julian nodded slowly. Then we rewrite the terms, he said. No more secrets, she added. No more roles, he agreed. They didn't kiss. Not yet. But something passed between them in that moment. Not desire, not tension, trust. The first brick laid in a house neither of them had planned to build. The drive home was unusually quiet. The city lights shimmered against the car windows like passing thoughts, too fast to hold on to. Ava sat beside Julian, her hands folded, gaze fixed out the window. His presence beside her was calm, but it wasn't the kind of calm that brought peace. It was restraint. It was a question neither of them had asked yet. The car pulled into the underground garage of his building. The silence followed them into the elevator. As the doors slid shut, Ava turned her head. You didn't ask me what I thought of them, she said. Julian met her eyes. I didn't need to. She smiled faintly. Good, because I wasn't going to lie. I knew that too. They reached the penthouse. The lock clicked open with a soft chime, and the two stepped inside. But this time, it didn't feel like entering his world. It felt like stepping into something shared. Julian loosened his tie and walked into the kitchen. Wine? No, she said. Tea. He blinked. Really? You said it tells the truth. He smiled slightly and opened the cabinet. Ava walked to the large window, barefoot now, her reflection shimmering against the glass. Behind her, the city stretched out like a river of stars. She was thinking not about where she was, but how she got here. Pretending had somehow led to feeling, and that feeling was becoming something too real to ignore. Julian returned with 2 mugs. They stood side by side again, the same way they had the night before. Only this time, something was different. Ava, he said quietly, what happens when this week ends? She took a sip. The tea was still too hot. She swallowed it anyway. "I think," she began, "we need to decide whether this was a story we told or a story we lived." Julian nodded. "And what do you think it was?" She turned toward him. "I think it started as a lie, but somewhere between your mother's tea and that dinner with wolves, I stopped pretending." He looked at her then, really looked. And for the first time, Ava saw him without armor. No tailored calm, no controlled wit. Just a man unsure of his place in his own life. "I'm scared," he whispered. Ava blinked. "Of what?" "That if I let myself want this, I'll ruin it, the way I ruin everything." She set her mug down. "Then stop waiting to ruin it," she said, "and just be in it." He stepped closer. "How?" "By letting go of the script, by telling me who you really are when no one's watching." Silence. Then softly, "My real name isn't Julian." Ava froze. "What?" "My full name is Julian Carter Shaw, but the Shaw part disappeared after my father died. The lawyers stripped it off everything, made me a clean brand." Ava stared. "You're telling me this now?" "I'm telling you because I want you to know me, not the headlines." Ava stepped closer. "What else don't I know?" He hesitated. Then, "I'm not just managing investments anymore. I'm starting something. Quietly. A fund that reinvests wealth into recovery projects, women's shelters, community clinics, medical scholarships. Not because it's profitable, but because you reminded me people are still worth saving." Ava's throat tightened. "I didn't mean to change you," she whispered. "You didn't," he said. "You just reminded me that I could change myself." The air between them felt different now, warmer, deeper. Not flirtation, not obligation, but recognition. She reached out, touched his hand. He took it, and for a long, fragile moment, they stood there with nothing left to say. Then he leaned in, not fast, not hungry, but with reverence. When his lips touched hers, it was like the city melted away. They didn't sleep together that night, but they stayed close. On the couch, under a soft throw, watching an old black and white film neither of them had seen before. Ava's head rested against his chest. Julian's fingers traced idle circles on her arm. It was the kind of intimacy that didn't need permission. After a while, Ava whispered, "Do you still think you're dying?" Julian kissed her hair. "No, but I think I'm finally alive." She smiled against his chest. "Tomorrow's going to be complicated," she murmured. "I know. People are watching." "Let them," he said. "I'm done hiding." Ava yawned. "Then let me sleep here tonight." "You don't have to ask." "I want to." He kissed her forehead. And for the first time in years, Julian Carter Shaw fell asleep beside someone without a single part of himself hidden. Morning arrived in golden silence. Ava stirred first. She blinked against the soft light slipping through the curtain gaps, unsure for a second where she was. Then she felt the slow rise and fall of Julian's breath behind her, and it all returned. Last night, the truth, the kiss, the quiet falling. She hadn't meant to fall asleep on the couch. She hadn't meant to feel safe. But here they were. She turned gently, not wanting to wake him, but he was already awake, eyes open, watching her like he'd been doing it all night. "Good morning," he said, his voice low. Ava smiled. "You don't sleep, do you?" "I do," he said. "Just better when you're near." She rolled her eyes, but her smile widened anyway. He leaned in, kissed her lightly. "Stay," he whispered. "I wasn't going anywhere." They had breakfast on the balcony, something simple, toast, eggs, tea. No suits, no performance, just the city humming below like a lullaby. Julian checked his phone for the first time all morning, then his smile vanished. Ava noticed. What? He hesitated. There's a problem at the firm. One of the press liaisons leaked something. She tensed. What kind of something? He sighed. Photos. Of us. Ava set her fork down. From when? I don't know. The rooftop. The gala. Maybe the gallery. Her breath slowed. So, what? People know now? Yes, and they're speculating. He looked at her carefully. Ava, I'll handle it. Handle what? She asked, voice sharper than she meant. The truth? Julian reached for her hand. I'm not ashamed of you. I didn't say you were. But you're scared, he said gently. She didn't answer. A moment passed. Then, what are they saying? That I'm vulnerable, that I'm distracted, that the nurse is a risk. She stood abruptly. So I'm a risk now? Not to me, but to your empire. He rose slowly. You knew this might happen. I told you. No, Julian, you warned me, but you didn't tell me what it would feel like. I'm not built for this. He stepped closer. Then let me protect you. No, she said firmly. Let me decide if I even want to be protected. He paused. What are you saying? I'm saying I need time. Away. Alone. Julian's jaw tightened. Is this about the press or about me? She looked at him, and he saw something there he hadn't seen before. Fear. Of losing herself. I don't know, she admitted. Then she picked up her coat and keys. I'm going to work, she said softly. I picked up a shift. I need normal. Julian didn't stop her. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, letting her walk away. Hours passed. Julian sat at the dining table with his laptop open but untouched. The press calls piled up. Emails buzzed. PR damage control reports waited. But he couldn't focus, because all he could think about was the way she looked at him before she left. Not like a woman in love. Like a woman on the edge of losing herself. Meanwhile, Ava stood at the nurse's station at Lenox Hill, watching patients shuffle past. Every beep of the monitors, every soft whisper of chart paper being flipped. This was her world. This was where she knew who she was, and yet she felt completely displaced. Sandra, her supervisor, came up beside her. Hey. Ava tried to smile. Hey. I saw the article. Ava froze. Sandra leaned on the counter. You okay? Not really. Sandra nodded. You want the truth? Ava braced herself. I always knew there was something different about you. The way you carry pain but don't show it. The way you see people. Ava blinked. Sandra continued. I don't care if he's a billionaire or a bartender. If he loves you, really loves you, he'll fight for you. And if he doesn't, good riddance. But you don't run just because it's complicated. Ava looked down. What if I'm scared of losing myself in his world? Then don't disappear, Sandra said. Define your place in it. By evening, Ava returned to her apartment, her real one, the small, noisy, humble space she hadn't seen in days. She dropped her bag, took off her shoes, sat on the floor by the bed, and cried. Not from heartbreak, but from uncertainty. Julian, across town, sat on his balcony, a glass of untouched whiskey beside him. Then he opened his phone and began typing. Ava. I don't know what to say without risking everything. But here's the truth. You didn't shake my world because you were beautiful or kind. You shook it because you didn't try to belong in it. You belonged to yourself. And I admired that more than anything. If you walk away, I'll understand. But if there's still a part of you that wants to finish this story, I'll wait. No spotlight, no pressure, just me. The version that only exists with you. He hesitated, then hit send. That night, Ava lay in bed, phone on her chest, unread message glowing on the screen. She hadn't opened it yet. She wasn't ready. But she hadn't deleted it either. And that, maybe, was its own kind of answer. It was Friday morning when the headline dropped. The Billionaire and the Nurse. Julian Carter's Secret Romance Exposed. Finance Weekly exclusive. Ava hadn't opened the message from Julian yet, but now she didn't need to, because the world had opened it for her. Photos were everywhere. Her in scrubs leaving the hospital, walking beside Julian at the gala, laughing on the art gallery steps. Their secret had been sliced into pieces and rearranged like tabloid fiction. Worse still was the narrative. Some outlets called her a mystery woman. Others weren't so kind. Is she after his money? A real-life Cinderella or calculated gold digger? Should a man like Carter risk everything for a woman with nothing? Ava's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Colleagues, journalists, strangers. But she didn't respond to any of it. She just sat on her bed, staring at her reflection in the black mirror of her turned-off screen. Who was she now? Across the city, in a towering boardroom on the 49th floor of a midtown skyscraper, Julian Carter Shaw sat before 6 members of his company's advisory board. He hadn't called the meeting. They had. "We'll get right to it," said Grayson Reed, eyes hard as granite. "Your personal relationship is creating instability. Our investors are calling." Julian leaned back. "Let them." "Julian," said Dean Maiwu, voice tight. "We know you're not a man who likes being told what to do, but this isn't about ego. It's about exposure." "And what exactly am I exposing?" Julian asked calmly. "Your judgment," Adrian Lang cut in. "You built this company on calculation and control. This," he slid the magazine across the table, "screams neither." Julian didn't flinch. "I haven't broken any laws." "No," said Grayson, "but you've broken confidence." Julian stood. Slowly, deliberately. "Confidence in what?" he said. "In my ability to pretend? In my capacity to isolate emotion from every part of my life?" "You don't get to be human at this level," Adrian hissed. "You get to be effective." Julian looked around the table. He wasn't angry. He was done. "I've already drafted the paperwork," he said. "Effective immediately. I'm stepping down as president of JC Strategies." Silence. "You're walking away?" May asked, stunned. "No," he said. "I'm walking towards something else." He picked up the magazine, glanced once at the photo of Ava. "I forgot what it felt like to care about something that doesn't fit in a portfolio. She reminded me." He walked to the door. "Julian," Grayson called, "you do this, you lose everything you built." Julian turned back. "Then I'll build something better." That afternoon, Ava received a delivery at her apartment. It wasn't flowers, it wasn't jewelry, it was a framed document, clean, minimal, her name printed at the top in elegant font. Founding Director. The Carter Moreno Health Initiative. Ava L. Moreno, Head of Patient Advocacy Care Equity. Underneath, a note in Julian's handwriting. "Not a gift, a partnership, if you want it. J." Ava stared at it for minutes, then she opened her phone. The message he'd sent the night she left still sat unread. She clicked it. She read every word. She cried. And she picked up the phone. 2 hours later, Ava stood in front of Julian's building. No security, no press waiting. Only him, standing on the sidewalk like he'd been there since the day she walked out. When she approached, she didn't say anything. She just held up the framed document. "I didn't ask for this." "I know. I don't want to be your redemption story." "You're not," he said. "You're my reality." A pause. "And what if I say yes?" she asked. Then we start over. No scripts, no roles, no pretending. And if I say no, I'll still build the initiative, he said, but I'll miss you at every step. Ava looked down at the paper again, then back up at him. I didn't fall in love with Julian Carter, she said. I fell in love with the man who made tea after midnight and danced in socks in a $20 million apartment. Julian smiled faintly. He's still here. Then let's find out who he becomes, with me beside him. She stepped forward. He didn't move. She reached up and kissed him. Not like a movie, not like a fairy tale, but like a woman kissing the only man who ever made her feel like she didn't have to be anyone but herself. The press didn't get that photo, but it was the one moment they would both remember forever. The noise didn't stop overnight. Headlines still buzzed. The media still circled like moths to the flame. Online debates raged. Was it a publicity stunt? Was she genuine? Was he losing his edge? But Ava and Julian were no longer listening. Because 3 weeks after their public kiss on a New York sidewalk, they disappeared. Not into hiding, but into stillness. They moved into a small 2-bedroom loft in Brooklyn. Brick walls, soft rugs, mismatched mugs, one creaky floorboard that Julian always stepped on no matter how many times she warned him. It wasn't polished. It wasn't branded. But it was theirs. Julian stepped away from boardrooms and meetings. He redirected his time into the Carter Moreno Health Initiative, now fully operational, launching patient outreach, rural clinics, mobile trauma units. Ava didn't leave nursing. She refused to. But she dropped to part-time, splitting her days between scrubs and strategy meetings. She no longer chased survival. She began designing systems. The woman who once carried others' pain silently was now building solutions for it. One Sunday afternoon, Julian stood by the kitchen window watching her. She was sitting on the floor, sorting through handwritten letters from community clinics. Thank you notes, stories, photos of lives touched. Her hair was in a messy bun, her glasses halfway down her nose. She was humming something soft. He realized in that moment she wasn't glowing in spotlight. She was glowing in peace. He walked over and sat beside her. Ava looked up. What? You look different, he said. Older? No, braver. She smiled, pressing her shoulder into his. You ever miss the old life? She asked. The penthouse, the power, the titles? He thought about it, then shook his head. I miss the silence in those rooms, but only because I didn't know what real quiet sounded like. She tilted her head. And what does real quiet sound like? Julian leaned closer, whispered, Your heartbeat, next to mine. That night, after dinner, and after the news, and after she fell asleep on the couch during a documentary she insisted she wanted to finish, Julian sat at the desk in the corner of the loft and opened a blank document. He titled it, The Version of Me She Made Possible. He began to write, not for press, not for a boardroom, but for himself. She never tried to fix me, never tried to mold me into the version of a man she thought I could become. Instead, she stood close enough for me to want to become him on my own. She was a nurse before she was my fiancé, a caregiver before she was a partner, a fighter before she ever let herself be loved. And now, she's all of those things, with me, beside me. Not as a chapter in my story, but as the story itself. He paused, hit save, then shut the laptop quietly. She was still asleep on the couch, arm draped across her face. He pulled the blanket over her gently, watched her for a moment, and whispered, I would have never written a single line without you. 1 month later, Ava was invited to speak at a global health summit in Geneva. She wore a navy blazer over a simple dress. No stylist, no entourage. But she held the room like it was built for her. She told stories about triage units that lacked gloves, about mothers who couldn't afford a second ambulance ride, about patients who smiled while dying. And then she told them about hope, not the abstract kind, the kind you build piece by piece, person by person. Healthcare, she said, standing beneath the lights, is not about saving lives. It's about restoring dignity, one soul at a time. The applause was thunderous, but when she stepped off the stage, the first thing she saw was Julian, waiting in the wings, hands in his pockets, eyes only on her. "Don't ever leave my sight again," he whispered. "You followed me to Switzerland. I'd follow you anywhere." They kissed behind the curtain. No cameras, no audience, just them. Later that night, back in their hotel room overlooking the lake, Ava found a box on the nightstand. She opened it slowly. Inside was a simple silver ring and a tiny folded note. "You paid $1,000 to pretend to be my fiancé. This time the offer is real. No deadline, no performance, just you, me, and the quiet future we earned." It had been a year. 12 months since the night Julian kissed her on a cold sidewalk. 12 months since she walked into his world and refused to shrink inside it. The world had changed. Not all at once, but in ripples. Their faces weren't on magazines anymore. The noise had quieted. Headlines had moved on. But Ava still kept every article, not to remember the chaos, but to remember how far they had come. It was a rainy Sunday morning when she found the letter again, stuffed inside a book she never finished reading, tucked behind a receipt for Chinese takeout and a faded subway card. The envelope was sealed, unsent, unwritten, addressed simply, "To the man I never expected to love." She sat at the kitchen table, the one they'd built together, mismatched chairs and all, and stared at it for a long time. Then she opened it and began to write. "Dear Julian, I wrote this letter the night before our final Fiancé event. Do you remember? The one with the art gala and the champagne tower you said tasted like static electricity? Back then, I didn't know what we were. I didn't know who I was either. I just knew I was afraid. Afraid that I was losing myself. Afraid I was a placeholder in your carefully curated life. Afraid that when it was over, I'd return to mine and find it emptier than before. So, I wrote this letter to let you go, before you had the chance to leave me first. But I never sent it. Because the next morning, you brought me tea with too much honey and told me your real last name. Because you looked at me like I was the only truth you'd never had to rehearse. Because that night, you didn't ask me to stay. You just knew I would. And I did. Julian, there are still days when I wonder if I'm strong enough for all of this. When I hear whispers in hospital corridors, or read anonymous comments that think they know me. There are days when I still feel like that girl from the ER who counted hours in double shifts and cried in stairwells after patients died. But then, I come home, and you're there, not saving me, but seeing me. You made space for me in your world without asking me to shrink. You handed me your name, your legacy, your silence, and you let me rewrite it. This letter was supposed to be the end. Instead, it's a beginning I didn't have words for back then. So now, I rewrite it too. Dear Julian, I love you. Thank you for changing my life by letting me live it beside you. Yours, this time fully. Ava. She set the pen down. The kitchen was quiet. only the rain tapping gently against the window, the clock ticking above the fridge. Julian walked in, hair tousled, still in sleep clothes. He kissed her temple. "What are you writing?" he asked softly. She smiled. "A letter." "To who?" "To the man I never expected to love," she said. He looked at her curiously, then sat down, waiting. She handed him the page and watched his eyes move across the words. At the end, he folded it carefully, pressed it to his chest. Then he said, "Can I write back?" She laughed. "Only if you start with, 'Dear Ava.'" That night, they sat on the balcony with old jazz playing low in the background. No spotlights, no cameras, no scripts, just two people who had learned that the greatest stories aren't written in headlines, but in tea-stained letters, quiet mornings, and the small choice to stay, even when it would be easier to run. And somewhere in that stillness, the world kept turning. But Ava and Julian, they had already arrived.